wanted to make a follow-up video to my commentary on Genesis 1:1 and to go over a few details of that verse that I didn't go over in the first video. Mostly in the first video, I was talking about interrogative criticism or interrogative analysis, that is, categorizing concepts by the question type to which they refer. So the heaven and the earth, or the sky and the earth, are both places, and being both places, they would fall into the interrogative category where. God, of course, the subject of the sentence, answers the question who. We could also say, however, that the gods as a species, perhaps, however, with a single member, form a special species or a special whatness or kind. So we would say that God, being God, whatever predicates you want to attach, greatness, goodness, or whatever, but in this case, the fact that he created the setting or the settings of all other species, the heaven and the earth, and also the sea, I think, later on. So the heaven is the setting of the birds, the earth, the setting of land-dwelling animals, and the sea, the setting of fish, and so on. You could ask, well, what is the setting of God? And maybe just in the beginning, or in principio in the Latin, you have to ask the question whether is this really a temporal beginning? Does it really answer to the question when? When did God create the heaven and the earth? If not in that act of creation, he also creates when, just as he creates where. But notice that the members of the interrogative category where are two, because I think the authors of Genesis want to imply that God the gods are the only permissible singular concept. And this would be, this could all be summarized just by saying, or pointing out, what the first verse, Genesis 1:1, does not say. It does not say that in the beginning God created the world. It does not say, to repeat, in the beginning God created the universe, and that's it. Because concepts that fall under the interrogative category where, none of them are permitted to be singular. That's my suggestion. Don't really insist on it, but so it's a useful introduction to the interrogative and to the interrogative criticism. Pause. Yeah, so I think we'll jump then to the next part. The interrogative criticism, of course, focuses so much on the nouns of the sentence. However, the verb is created, or in Latin, creavit, in the past tense. And yeah, so let's look at the verb. Sometimes I refer to this kind of criticism as verbal criticism, or functional criticism. Insofar, a verb, it's like a program or like a function. It's an action. And yeah, so there's actually something else to say. about to digress, but yeah, tell me more about this creating. Yeah, where does this creating take place? In this case, the action is more important than any setting. Why is that important? Well, I think that's unlike the mind or the mentality of physics, which, according to which, all motions, so all actions, take place in nature in some all-night sky. So if you know the laws of this terrain, then you can predict all motions that happen in it because the terrain is invariant, and yeah, it follows. It upholds somehow these invariant laws which govern all action. So action, not only all things, but all action is also contained in a single milieu, according to, I guess, cosmological physics, and at least the mentality as it's, I think, naively understood by a combination of reason, imagination, and obedience, such that we know pretty well the solar system, we know pretty well the Earth is round, and it itself revolves, and it revolves around the sun, even if intuition, that is, sight, as it's naively constituted, doesn't actually give us that idea. It's won by tradition, reasoning, calculation, and so on. And school children learn it not because they see it, but because they win praise by repeating it and aping it, even if by their own efforts they could never repeat from nothing, ex nihilo, the heliocentric, I guess, universe or model. I don't know what to call it, as opposed to the geocentric or Ptolemaic model of cosmos, or all spheres together. I don't want to just throw out singular concepts for setting the concepts of one member for in the category where, as though they were self-evident and important, had to be respected every time we thought about anything, anytime we constituted an argument in multiple steps. So anyway, the element of the sentence to examine is the koreawit. So this suggests that action may actually be independent of setting, but instead, because it's God that created the heaven and the earth. In this case, it's probably not going to be said that this action, howsoever divine, is independent of its doer. So it seems to revolve in a mentality that action, even though it's independent of any necessary all-surrounding or all-containing setting, and nonetheless not independent of a doer. So for every deed, you can trace it back to an individual doer who did it. Quis koreavit caelum et terram. Well, Deus, God created the heaven and the earth. Who did? Yeah. And why do we care so much about the verb created? Oh, it just says that, again, that motion is more important than universe, or than both heaven and earth, because a singular locational concept is, I think, intentionally not allowed here. So the next step then in this kind of neo-theology, this is what I call this kind of interpretation with mainly a philosophical intent. So the next step of this kind of focus on the verbs is to ask, if someone were to ask you, does God exist, or do you believe in God? It's probably worth examining what's meant by those verbs exist and believe and to believe. I don't want to get too much into the question whether or not whether God exists, but I think the main fallacy or a bad approach to that question, either in the affirmative or in the negative, is to never define the verb to exist. And this is where I think definitions are important. With nouns, I'm not convinced that the definition is so important as the interrogative category or the number. The number meaning whether the concept is singular or plural by nature. In some cases, it could also be dual. In some cases, it can be both singular and plural. Just like science, for example, typically invoked in the singular, but you can have the sciences, different branches, physics, chemistry, biology, for example. So it just has that dual nature numerically, or maybe the gods play with our human categories or concepts. Oh, well, this concept has to be a singleton. This one has to be a plural concept, and I can just picture a god of chaos, maybe a Dionysus, just masquerading as many than as the one, just to confound reason, or whatever schema we set up to aid us in our reading, and not just to aid us in our reading. The power of the schema is potentially reveals itself in artificial intelligence, and I think assisted decision making as well, which will come into play in other areas of human activity, like investment, for example, or maybe even management, politics, and so on. How banal! It's just business. But busyness is also action, and it may be an action that's independent of region or domain. So it defies the thesis that the category where is not only the most important, but also that the total milieu universe also contains all action. So all action or actions by nature are regulated so that you can, in theory, predict them all, contain them, and so on. Okay. I think that was the most of what I wanted to say in response, just to elaborate. Speaking again about Genesis 1:1, I had one follow-up remark to make, and that is the question, from what does God create the heaven and the earth? And you could also ask whence, even though whence in English is usually a locational concept, it's actually a counterpart to where and whither, allowing location to have actually these three aspects. But typically in modern thinking, the where, which was a middle for classical mankind with whence, where, and whether the middle one, the where, becomes all containing as universe or world, becomes a singular concept. Where was I? From what does God create the heaven and the earth? The question from what does not seem to apply, which lets theologians or traditional theologians come up with this concept, creatio ex nihilo, or creation from nothing, which is later figured in the Fiat Lux, or let there be light, of one of the later verses in this chapter of Genesis. Now, whether or not you insist on creatio ex nihilo, I think in the case of this kind of creation, this action, that the aspect from what is just not so important. It's just not so relevant. I don't have to care whether it's from nothing or from something, but I would say that either the action itself is just more important than from what. It just doesn't matter that much. It could happen and just make its own from what. Whether it's ex nihilo or x whatever, the x itself doesn't even matter. Or the from whatever doesn't matter. So that's also one thing to notice. And maybe it's slightly inaccurate to say that no concept in the category where is permitted to be singular, because look, the heaven and the earth. Well, for earth, for example, sure, but if that really is a concept, then in other words, a set with members like horse, the concept, or book. Well, which one? Well, allowing. You could say, well, which one? Of course, the Bible is just the book. And that's a case where you have a hybrid of a monopoly concept, which, yeah, there are many, but when you say the default or the book, you know which one you ought to know. And where was I? So, Earth Earth is, if it were a concept, it'd be singular, but I think the Earth is just a proper noun for a region among, different regions. Does the concept region prefigure here the present of the sentence? No, I'm just interpreting. And I think that's really about it. Just one more remark at the risk of overstretching your patience. If anyone made it this far in the video. So when we say that God created the heaven and the earth and interpreted, we've established that the categories, interrogative, from what, not so important, where, not so important, who, yeah, pretty darn important, and what act or what verb of the sentence is not really an interrogative aspect, because I see a direct link between the verb and the sentence itself as a whole. So I don't want to pigeonhole it into where, from what, when, who, whether, and so on. Whether, did God create there? Apparently. And the earth and the heaven, or the heaven and the earth. So just interrogatively speaking, ignoring the verb or the action creating, we can establish that who, the category, is more important than from what and where. And so every time we approach one of these verses, or we consider the mathematic or the science of a culture, as with Spengler, we have to ask, well, what are the interrogative value premises? So, I think, for the ancient Greeks, what is more important than all of the other interrogative categories, I would say, and the language and the thinking, I guess, are an attempt to reduce all of their categories to that of whatness. If where is just a place, and a place is just a kind of thing, then place or where is attempted to be reduced to whatness. Maybe. And for the mind of the modern physicist, I think where is overwhelmingly more important than any other categories. Who, it doesn't matter because all human beings are actually equal. Individual differences are either unimportant or illusory. It doesn't. The same thing with motion. It doesn't matter whether it's bricks or feathers. The same laws of motion apply to all. There are no privileged species like angels or whatever that travel through ethereal ether according to some different principles and so on. But you could say that when Deus creates Kylum, that maybe this you could say the sky is all where. You could say that. And you could say that Terram is actually all from what? So, from what did God create the all where and the all from what? Well, from nothing, I guess. And where did God create all where and all from what? Well, of course, nowhere. It doesn't matter, but etymologically it might like matter to earth and say, well, how can you deny something value by invoking the concept matter, earth, and so on. So, is that it? Probably.